All right, Igor, thank you so much for making the time for us to connect and have this conversation. Your work is very fascinating because it speaks to the truth of who we are and remembering our true nature. You've written many incredible books. And while information is powerful, like on my path, I've been collecting a lot of information. What I'm interested in is bringing all of this down to earth as much as possible. So anyone who listens can not just take it as an information, but truly allow the information to activate something within and then be able to apply whatever you share into practice. Because I feel like that's what's missing in the world. There's an overload of information, but there's a lack of embodiment. We all know, those of us on the path, right, of awakening, remembering who we are, stepping into our power, sharing our soul gifts. How do we actually embody it? This is what I'm interested in, right? That state of consciousness that actually lives in our nervous system, that goes beyond the mind and allows us to be, express as the truth of our being. So we can maybe start there. In your experience, because I know you've worked with a lot of people, what is it that stands in the way of us actually embodying who and what we are from your perspective and your experience? And then we can go into how do we actually then make that shift to embody that in our everyday lives?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a great joy to connect like this, Leyla. Thank you for initiating this. Um, for us to look at this, we would need to first and foremost acknowledge that there are different degrees to reality, and it depends what level of reality we're applying here to. That first and foremost, to make it clear as what is going on from behind the scenes, as opposed to, let's say, what seems or feels maybe as an unfair deal of being human being, right, with all its content of that what we call human condition. So perhaps without going into intricacy of, let's say, of how many levels of reality, we could simply speak about it that from the ultimate point of view, from the point of view of absolute oneness, we are always embodying it because we are an embodiment of that what here sees, and smells, hears, even down to the sensory perception. So human being here could be seen in variety of ways. It could be seen as this instrumentality for experience. The human being equipped with this extraordinarily complex, nuanced, I would say inimitable, no matter how close, let's say, this conversation now with regard to the AI, with regard to the mimicking human body, just human body we're talking about here right now. Science can never come close enough to touch the sheer intricacy of what goes into making of a human. This is something to ponder on. And we're not even touching now the display of human genius and human creativity in variety ways of how it does. But simply the biological functioning of a human being is a mystery in itself. So this biological functioning, of course, if we are speaking about it from a reductionistic point of view, can be seen as a kind of a biological machine. And there are some perspectives within spiritual circles that indeed view human body, human organism as that. as some kind of space suit where we navigate our, let's say, realms of existence on a daily basis. And I always argue that this perspective is extremely narrow, limiting, and in fact, giving us a very flat picture of what it means to be human. So that's just to get going into what goes on from behind the scenes in terms of embodiment. So, in other words, we first have to acknowledge that we already, all of us, absolutely, without exception, irrespective of where we are in terms of our level of awareness, already all embodying that oneness, that whatever we may call it, for different folks, different strokes, different cultures have their names. Some cultures prefer and traditions not to name that ultimate reality. But whatever that ultimate reality is, we all are equally embodying it already. Why? Because we are an embodiment of that reality. And with that being said, of course, what takes place at the respective level of, let's say, this affair of being human, that's not quite the same picture. And this is what, let's say, makes it not all that straightforward, because if this was enough to simply grok it once and for all, just simply understand that this underlying reality, that unified field, right, that Shiva, that Allah, that what have you, Christ consciousness, whatever we may call it, right, absolute, Brahman, if we all are already in equal measure that should set us free. But in my years of entering these shoes, right, like let's say consciously going into the spotlight of working with people, that's quite a different picture. So it's good to have this clarity of understanding and to have this mental maybe perspective, even at that level, that should be taught in schools. I would go as far as to say that this should really be our shared heritage, irrespective of where we come from, irrespective of whatever the orientations are in the society. This should be at a given. But that, of course, will not suffice. And this is where the necessity for applying certain consciousness-based methodologies have been always the case as far back as any of this goes in terms of, let's say, most ancient cultures who have this uninterrupted rapport on the topic, in cultures which, obviously here without a shred of a doubt, Indian civilization is one of the rare examples which witnessed rise and fall of various other civilizations. But it still has that, it speaks to that and communicates that language and that ethos that embodied in the Sanskrit terms Sanatana Dharma, which simply means the eternal way or eternal duty or eternal religion. There are a variety of ways of how one can translate and interpret that, but the term Sanatana Dharma most closely, universally, can be translated as the eternal law. So it's the law of how things are, as opposed to how we may prefer it to be. So in Indian civilization, that concept is the highest, most loftiest concepts that are being held and upheld. So we can argue that there are maybe some other civilizations that existed, thrived, and were destined to perish. And they would have, obviously, a degree of that understanding. But when it comes to culture, that Indian subcontinent itself as a geographical location is known, this has always been the case. So no matter how this ultimate reality is being the alpha and omega of every being, somehow this U-turn, this remembering, this recognition is inseparable part of homecoming. So here this is, let's say, to lay it out. So at the level of this embodiment, which is already the greatest gift, the greatest birthright of being human, slash what it fully represents, without diminishing the status of that affair, then of course, inevitably uh, comes the necessity with that what here goes out of remembrance. And so that what goes out of remembrance, I'm bouncing off of the language you have suggested, right? Remembering, right? That act of recognizing, remembering that that with reference to one's own self is what this is all about. And of course, there are many, many, many different ways of how this is done. Many, many different ways. If we are to speak of what goes into, let's say, what creates this ordeal, or how come this remembrance is lost, again, it depends on how various traditions view this. If I am to speak from the tradition which serves as a cloak, as an umbrella for this particular teaching, which is the Shaiva Tantras, right? The Tantras of Kashmir Shaivism, as it is popularly known, there is this understanding that ultimate reality, exemplified by the term Shiva, forgoes consciously its omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and all other qualities in order to have infinite points of view on itself. And in doing so, it comes into embodiment, and the world is an embodiment of that awareness. Shiva here stands for pure awareness. So the dynamic relationship here is such that each human being, therefore, is awareness in disguise, where that awareness undergoes that transmutation where it forgoes its essence in order to have this experience. We could even say, I could even go as far as to say, this human experience. So it can be seen in a variety of ways. It can be seen as the greatest sacrifice that awareness performs on itself, right? That oneness, unity, dismembers itself to such degree so as to give rise to diversity, multiplicity. And this diversity and multiplicity is then enjoyed by all of us to a variety of degrees. In some cases, let's say we take the verses from the Bhagavad Gita, it's spoken of as the greatest theft, as pocketing the experience. And hence that whole thing begins to unfold from there. Who is pocketing what? Why is it spoken in these terms? But if we are to take the perspective of the Shaivites, right, that some scholars consider to be the best that India has to offer, the mixtures, the fusion of it all, then that perspective, in a way, can revolutionize our understanding about this body, about this individual experience, about this fact of being disconnected. So it's not because of someone's fault or fault in creation or someone's personal, let's say, shortcoming, but that's the way awareness forgoes itself. And of course, with that, this is not an invitation to uh, rest or get stuck in a status quo. So that in itself acts as an invitation, right, as an encouragement. So if Shiva forgone its essence, Shiva likewise can remember itself, himself, herself, right? This is beyond the gender, obviously. So we can maybe begin from here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I'm just digesting everything you shared. And what's coming through is, so I've had personally experiences of, I guess, what is considered the Kundalini awakening or the remembering, right? Direct experiences of knowing myself as the ultimate and simultaneously this avatar, right? And what my system has been attempting to do throughout this awakening journey is, well, one, make sense of it. And two, there's been this knowing of you are given this gift of life, this gift of expression as a fractal within the infinite consciousness. For me personally, it's felt like, what am I here to do then? Knowing that I am the creator, I am an aspect of source that on some level has the same qualities as source. But the lens through which I experience it is by design limited. Do you agree? Is it by design? Is that's my experience? Like, it's limited by design, so then I can go through that journey of remembering and perhaps embodying more of the qualities of the limitless infinite expression and become the deliberate creator. The way that I understand that personally on my path is knowing how to master the self, the energy, and then be able to direct it towards the kind of world that I want to create, co create, participate in. Because I believe that as many humans as they are, right, as expressions, each one of us gets to experience its own version, its own universe in a way. And we experience our own version of Earth based on our level of consciousness, based on our belief systems, belief structures. And so, where is that authority, that free will, that sovereignty of the soul as that expression, as the limitless self, in your understanding? What are we to do with that awareness that, okay, we know, or I know, can't speak for everyone else, right? I am the creator of my own universe. Now, how do I consciously direct that energy towards creating the kind of world I want to live in? So, to give you an example, I feel my soul's mission is to co create a physical environment where souls come together and gather with the same intention of recreating a world the way we want to live it, right? One where we are embodied as that pure awareness, and there is coherence and alignment and inner peace and harmony between all the different parts of us. And how do we co create that harmonious, balanced environment within our own system and then with nature and animals and other humans, and create a new society, a new civilization, a more evolved way of, like, a prototype of how do we redesign the systems that then can be replicated globally by those who resonate with that way of being, right? Knowing ourselves as co creators with Source. I don't know if any of that made sense, but essentially, how do we embody that God given birthright of being a creator and then direct that energy to actually create the world we want to live in, as opposed to trying to fix the systems that are broken, right? Almost what some people refer to as exit the matrix, which I don't believe you exit anything. You just elevate into a new paradigm, a new operating system, if you will, that is more in alignment with truth, as opposed to the distortions that we have been operating from for millennia of fear, lack, separation, judgment, right? All of those programs. That's what's playing out in the collective, but we don't have to be part of that. It's a choice. That's my that's my experience.
Well, these are huge, enormous questions, enormously
Yeah.
important, and there's nothing that I don't sign under of what you have just said. It all deeply resonant here, and so if I'm to reflect on this, perhaps one of the understandings here is, again, if we are to, let's say, what is here, prevents us from creating a world that would be rooted in harmony, justice, all those qualities that are universally known as being inherently what makes us truly human. Those constants referred by ancient Greek philosopher Plato as constants, just as there are constants in a sense of geometrical shapes. There are constant, right? Tetrahedron is an expression of all the geometrical laws within one single shape. So this contains in itself, in a beautiful, proportionate, symmetrical way, the value of that what is considered to be constant, incorruptible. In likewise manner, what Plato suggested, there are this plank, this level, which below that, as a foundational ground, are the very, very aforementioned qualities, and we can add more to this, right? Love, compassion, equanimity, all these qualities. And anything that falls short of that is already a deviation from that, already a transgression. And each of these constant have that transgression that somehow violates the very laws upon which all this is being upheld, held together. Interestingly enough, as we have progressed in our society, progressed here, of course, is spoken purely with regard to how it is often used. And I don't want to hop on that cynical perspective and using inverted commas, because I also don't want to see this as that there is an infinite, somehow measurable regress. The word progress itself is a very, very ambiguous term. It depends. Maybe we've progressed in some areas, but have become more forgetful and therefore regressed in other areas. Maybe we progressed in the development and emphasis of certain mental capacities that led to this thriving of extraordinary level of achievement at the, let's say, technological side of what humanity can be, display, right? Whilst at the same time we might be experiencing crisis in emotional intelligence, right? And all this what comes out as a result, because without emotional intelligence, suffering will be as a result on the increase. And with the suffering on the increase, of course, all that what can be now counted as thwarting the very experience of being human is there and then. I'm not going to go into all this. Just going back to this concept that anything that went as a, let's say, transgression, as a, let's say, dilution and compromise of these Platonic values, we then accept and speak of today as human condition. So the very term human condition is accepted with a humility that this is who we are, that our essence is fallible, our essence is that corruptible. And then, of course, we have the centuries of religious teachings / doctrines where that corruptibility of human spirit is constantly being the very, very leitmotif. So, is that true? Is that not? You see, our conversation unfortunately cannot go purely because of its format into the great depth of how each particular tradition, even if we had to take something that by large, the most worshipped religion in the world is the trinity of the Abrahamic religions, right? It's a fact. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are very often called the great religions. They all belong to the same branch of the Abrahamic revelations. So this all belong to that revealed tradition. Of course, there's Buddhism, there's various different branches of Hinduism, there are many different other religions. But if we are to, let's say, give this as an example, the fallibility of human spirit is a red thread that runs throughout them all. And so, in a way, the construct of these religious truths inseparable from the very fallible nature of human being. Let's just make a pause here, because we are trying to disentangle something extremely subtle here, and we are in danger of very easily being misunderstood or losing the potential audience, those who are partaking this as listeners before they will, let's say, have the chance to comment on this. So let's put a pin here. So supposedly human being is fallible by nature. Supposedly human nature is corruptible, right? So at least we are made believe that that is so. Take any example, any story, the most famous of them all, the story of Christ, right? The story of Christ itself, according to the Gospels, already portrays that fallibility of the human spirit, because he's being betrayed, after all, by all his disciples. He's betrayed left, right, and center from get-going. And he knows that these betrayals exactly are in accord with the foretold destiny itself. So it kind of all sits neatly together in the metaphysical structure of that Christian theology, that Christ has to be betrayed. The betrayal has to begin with the betrayal, let's say, of the Judah who sells him for the 13 coins, right? He would have to be denounced by his first disciples, by Peter and Paul, and so it goes. Let's just leave this for a moment. There are perspectives that predate Abrahamic revelations, where human being is being viewed from the perspective of being nothing other than embodiment of that one without a second. So human being here literally is that, let's say, some of the most well-known postulates in classical systems of Indian philosophy, known as Brahman is, or Atman is Brahman. In other words, soul is absolute. So this equation here is given. So individual soul, individuated soul, is absolute. So yes, one can say, well, that same anthropomorphic relationship can be seen in Judaism and Christianity, right? That Adam Kadmon and so forth. But what we're dealing here with is a very interesting phenomena that consciousness by very nature encompasses in itself field of pure potentialities. In other words, it contains everything within itself, absolutely everything. That everything here is obviously includes that what is terrifying for, let's say, someone like yourself and myself, purely from the point of view of its being not acceptable as human traits. But from the ultimate perspective, all these, what is considered to be, let's say, human traits, are still very much inseparable from what otherwise is all-encompassing. And so that's where the crack of the matter. This is where the most, I would say, forbidden part, that very, we could even call it now, in extending that analogy we gave, the very yeah, I don't know, the chalice, this is where that formidable drink is, that absolutely everything available in the field of pure potentialities, and it is that what we take from that field of pure potentialities, and we bring it into a conscious awareness, and we make this into our reality. Excuse me. So, which means that this perspective that exists, and not only in Indic lore, the perspective that fascinated Carl Jung in particular, that according to his, let's say, musings on this topic, on the topic of religions, of course, and on the topic of human psychology, made him come to these realizations that it is in human being that God becomes conscious. This is a very well-known perspective. So Jung simply echoes here what he come across in these teachings. And we know Jung dubbed with Tantra. He was fascinated, and his whole psychology, his whole work, and his lectures, the very important seminars on Kundalini that he delivered in the early 30s in Zurich to the society of the educated at the time, of the peers in the field. So obviously we know that the connection was very strong. So that proposal, of course, is very audacious, that it is in human being that the God becomes conscious. So awareness, as it were, is not at all conscious of itself unless it has that potential of being reflected back onto itself. So this is terrifying, whilst at the very same time extraordinary. Terrifying because what it opens up to. And it is, I argue, exactly what we are living right now in terms of the revelation, in terms of that apocalypse where the veil is torn of what the human in potentiality is. So the reality is now, it could be seen, therefore, and in some of my discourses that are less, let's say, intrinsically focusing on the internal, more like, let's say, esoteric aspects of awakening and all this, what is spoken of as the process. But when I speak more in terms of drawing a larger pictures, that the battle between, let's say, the forces of good, or the goodness, and the forces of what could be spoken of as that, the embodiment of utmost negativity, is always at play as a cosmic drama. But in our day and age, it comes at its literally face-off points, or point, that time when literally different realities collide. So this requires, of course, going back now to, so are we these Platonic values? Are we inherently good? Are we inherently corruptible? Well, you see that we cannot draw the line. We cannot say who we are. It all becomes conscious here. So the battle always is being settled nowhere but here, within each and every one of us, absolutely without exception. And since that battle has been going on for quite some times, so it's not a battle that started yesterday, 10 years ago, or 100 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago. So this trajectory of that has been going on for quite a while. We can kind of safely lean on these perspectives of the yugas, or ages, right? Epochs. Okay, so let's accept the fact that we live in the age of ignorance, the Iron Age, right? The Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, where darkness, ignorance prevails. And because darkness prevails, or rather, why darkness prevails is because the value of natural law is not manifest at the level of manifestation. It's hidden. So therefore, the natural law is constantly violated. violated at absolutely all levels. For example, if the foundation of the house already crooked, every single room in a house, every single surface in a house, every single floor in a house will be crooked, like the Tower of Pisa. It will be crooked, it will be leaning, it will not be straight, it will not be. So in a way, that's how we can view this also. So in a given age, in a given epoch, everything is already has that propensity. Does that make us fallible? Does that make us perfect? Well, this is open to each and everyone's reflection, because that is decided in each and every one of us. We are constantly met with this exactly: which way will I lean? Which way will I lean? From minute, insignificant decision making throughout the day that goes unnoticed. And it feels unimportant, it feels irrelevant, to grand decisions of our leaders of society to take, let's say, certain turn, because they are the embodiment of collective level of consciousness. So if the single man can, through the whole entire world, into enormous recession, as what we're witnessing right now, just by single-handedly going into war in support of one country, right, as Trump did just now, we can argue that this is something really, really uneasy about the way our values are constructed, that one single man. Of course, we can now, it's easy to slide into conspiratorial or like kind of like situational narrative like based story. Oh, well, Epstein files were released, therefore many, many names, someone's name need to be maybe taken out of the equation. Maybe this will divert the attention. We don't know. But if that's the case, or whatever else is the case, the repercussions of that are horrifying. And all that is Trump not a human being? Is he extraterrestrial? Is any leader of the countries that are is not a human being? You see, so where does it take us? It takes us back to that very, very foundational question, the question where God becomes aware, just as Jung horrifyingly for himself. And well, that was his admonition, that suggestion, admonition, even if it was borrowed from or inspired by another culture, that was deeply fascinating for him. But this is very, very Vedic perspective, because Vedic perspective has this beautifully aligned that every human being is an expression of the totality of natural law. There is this term, right? The human being is universal. Individual is universal. Each individual, not that individual or that individual. The nervous system, the sheer capacity for this experience is already an expression of universal laws. So how did we come to this point in time when there's so much injustice, where there's so much suffering, when that is, of course, is the biggest question. And you pose that question boldly, right from get going. So of course, as I said, we can only scratch maybe the surface level in this conversation, and it will require many, many returns to this to really, really separate wheat from the chaff to what is actually going on, as opposed to just like always having that blame game that someone else is responsible. I'm minding my own business, I'm living my life, I'm trying to do, I'm paying bills, I'm just like, it's enough as it is, like, why are the people out there so horrible? Yes, of course, sometimes it's a great relief to kind of like, to just acknowledge this horrors of what's going on, let's say, out there, right? Kind of, but the picture is much more complex, and that complexity here in the word you also used, that in the coherence. And we live in time when fundamentally coherence is lacking in society. So the violation of natural law is because there's no coherence. And why? Okay, we can also speculate because maybe because somehow whether there have been a lot of ages and centuries of spiritual religious teachings, but we still somehow in our day and age believe that this life is all we have. And the insatiable desire to accumulate, to carb, to hoard, and leads always to that what inevitably creates this sense of dissatisfaction, because if we are not fulfilled by a fact of being alive, which is an extraordinary in itself, then nothing will fulfill us. Because everything, every object in existence is a consolation. Consolation is we can speak about it, a cherry on a cake or a consolation. Depends on the perspective we take. And just before getting it back to you, when you said at the beginning, also like came across as an inquiry. So our perceptions, our experiences, like, what do I think about it in terms of like, is it limited? How limited is that? And why is it limited? In this latest book on Kundalini, in that volume, somewhere I felt compelled to give this perspective so as to give alternative view on human experience, not being seen as limitation in itself in every way. And these examples, let's say, going back to the early days of the social media, when all this kind of like 20, 25 years ago, and well, like more like 20 years ago, when all the social media started to rise, the platforms, like Facebook, what have you, all these posts of how little human range of perception is only 4% of all the vibrations, of all the waves, that all that we have is this 4%. And it always sounded and made it sound as make us miaga, make us missing in all that. And I make my argument, I made this argument differently. I'm saying that our 4% is not a limitation, but an extraordinary, intricate process of filtering. Filtering, so as to give that exact right sliver where the beauty of this phenomenal world can be experienced and savored. What am I to do with the ability to see infrared light or ultraviolet light? Right? Do I care now what you ate for lunch or breakfast or dinner if I can have X-ray capacity to see you through? You see? So this is just this kind of like, I felt like literally I wanted to, because I spoke about it for many, many years. Then I decided to put it, encapsulate that into the written language, that it's not a limitation. It depends how we view this. It's a deliberate filtering, progressive way of making it possible that this register is human experience, this register. Yes, of course, there are breakthroughs. Yes, of course, there are extraordinary experiences. But if we are to truly see this, all mystics go through them, and they all go back to that what is exemplified by the beautiful lines of the British mystic poet, right, William Blake, to see the infinity in an hour, like the world in a grain of sand, in a blade of grass. So all these finite expressions are constant reminder of the infinity of creation, not to be forgone, not to be taken for granted. It's beautiful, precious for what it is. So therefore, I refuse to see this as a kind of a poor story of human being. We are confined to this experience of this few percent and the range is not available to us. It's not meant to be available, because that is like a greatest work of art, to bring it to the point where within this, whatever that, who, I don't even know where that exact figure comes, 4%, but let's say we take that. So this 4%, and look at the world. Look at the world, you know? Look at the magnificence of this world in the way it displays itself. So it's an extraordinary precious that what embodiment here represents. So anyway, I thought to just add that because it somehow was part of your build up, very, very, very complex and very powerful series of questions that you posed.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, there's so many rabbit holes that we could go down to, but just to keep it, again, my intention is always to bring it down to earth as much as possible, right? Because all of these conversations are beautiful, but how can we apply them to our everyday life? And I know you speak to that as well, right? Like um what's the terminology used, the householder, like how do we bring it to the household? All of this conversation, how can we apply it to elevate our experience of everyday life? Like that, again, that figure of 4%, like how do we make that filter that we're kind of built in with actually work to our advantage and make our experience extraordinary? Because oftentimes the lenses that through which we view things and the mind that then creates all these stories distorts our ability to perceive reality for what it is, because it's all of these, again, distortion is the best word, right? We're not seeing the world clearly because we have all these stories that are added, these filters, that the conditioned mind, the inherited beliefs that we put in between us and reality, and being able to perceive it clearly without the stories. So it's like that human condition again, right? Like, how can we take back our power from the inherent nature of the mind is to create stories because we need to make sense of, the ego needs to make sense of itself in this field of reality as a separate being, yet still holding the awareness that I am one with all, and yet I am this individuated expression of the all while interacting with the field simultaneously. So it's and also one more point to what you were speaking to earlier about all of those questions that you were posing, right? That we all kind of collectively make. All of those questions are coming from the perspective of being a separate self. If we have an experience, a direct experience of being one with everything, there is no separation between the most horrific things and the most beautiful things that, again, we are the ones defining what is horrific, what is amazing, what is beautiful, what is the most joyful. It's all the mind is creating a story. So in my experience, it's all one and the same. And to the degree that I judge the horrific things in the world is the degree to which I internally create separation from the one, from embodying that unity consciousness. So I see that as the root, essentially, of that program of separation playing out in the collective. It's because inherently the ego, the mind, the separate self, is it the Atman that's the separate self? The Brahman is the ultimate? I always confuse the two.
Well, they are ultimately the same. I mean, so the Atma is the individual soul, and Brahman is the absolute.
The individual soul thinks that it's separate and then somehow judges what it sees and perceives as somehow being wrong. And that's what actually creates the disharmony and the incoherence in the field, because it experiences itself as separate and somehow judges it. Whereas in my, like, that's my path, is to truly create dissolution from that part of me that somehow the judge, right? Like integrate, again, going back to young and his part of his work of the shadow integration, it's collectively integrating that shadow aspect of the fallible human, the one that is capable of horrific things. I feel that it's because at a deep level, collectively, we don't accept the shadow because we don't understand it. I think if we deeply met ourselves, our own shadow, and integrated those shadows, that's been my experience. The more that I face and integrate the shadows of the psyche and I understand them deeply, is the degree to which I can actually activate and generate compassion and empathy towards them. And I feel that that's what is playing out in the big theater of humanity, is because we are experiencing ourselves still through that lens of being the separate self and somehow making something outside of us. There's nothing outside of us. It's a projection of our own consciousness. Wrong. And collectively, I feel there's a need to actually face and understand that inner judge that somehow believes that it's more superior to the thing that it's judging as wrong. It's simply because we don't understand the shadow collectively. So there's two things I'd love for you to speak on that, if whatever your perspective is. And the second thing, or maybe three things. So that's first. The second would be, how do we bring it to our day-to-day life, this understanding in how we live and how we speak and how we behave and how we, again, down to earth. And then the third would be, if we have time, I would love, because you mentioned it earlier, and that's my deepest passion and desire, is to redesign how we educate the next generation, how the redesigning of the educational system, because it's so broken. It was never created to be holistic or regenerative or remind the human of who it truly is and what that even means, right? In the new earth, how do we educate the next generation? So that's maybe for another day, because it's a whole long, really never-ending topic that could be developed through centuries. But that's what I feel the most passionate about as well, because we do need a new way of understanding ourselves and then sharing that with the new generation, and already giving them that gift of, because they already are born remembering. It's like, how do we not mess up that process of conditioning so that they can remain with that knowing when they're first born? They do know, they do remember. We just condition them out of it. So anyways, I will leave you there. You can take it wherever you feel inspired to take it.
Yes, absolutely. And this, it's actually where we have, let's say, left it to where you're suggesting to go now, in bouncing off your previous inquiry, and me trying to kind of weave it, in variety of threads to put them together. So that, let's say, uniqueness of being human, right? That, let's say, what here is we could say, a masterpiece of creation. And there are perspectives. We can, if we are to go into this from scholarly perspective, we can implement, let's say, systems of understanding, like in Indian philosophy in particular, the process of manifestation, right? How the absolute becomes, how oneness becomes many, how diversity itself manifests, how the diversity comes about. And this is known as, it's all through the expositions on the process of manifestation known as tattvas, the categories in consciousness. The Sanskrit term tattva simply could be translated into English in this case as tat, which is that, tat, and tattva, thatness of something. So in classical Indian philosophy, there are 24 tattvas. And in Kashmir Shaivism, there are 36. So let's say if we are to speak about these 36 tattvas of creation, from the absolute tattva of awareness to that what is exemplified through elementary creation, like 36 tattvas, the earth, right? Mm-hmm. From the Atmas tattva of Shiva to the tattva of Bhumi, from tattva of awareness to tattva of the material, literally, creation. Mm-hmm. There are cascading degrees of manifestation. And so for the creation to take place, there are these phases of progressively limiting itself. Literally, the omniscience and omnipotence and omnipresence and all that, what is effectively speaking, knows no other, which knows no second, which knows no diversity, which is pure unity, which is beyond time, beyond space, because those are not even born. In order to have experience, in order to know itself, undergoes these progressive phases, which requires these veilings. And that is what this process known as Maya. So out of all this, let's say, first pure tattvas, there is this process of manifestation requires this limitation. At the highest level, we could speak about it as, let's say, awareness, bliss, volition, cognition, action. These are 5 pure categories, 5 pure tattvas. Awareness, bliss, volition as will, cognition as knowledge, and action. Right? These are pure categories. All pure. Pure will, right? Or absolute will, absolute cognition, absolute action. Unlimited. But directed towards what? You see, it's all swell, and in order for it to progress, there needs to be this progressive phase of limitation. So that progressive phase of limitation begins from the 6th tattva, known as Maya. And Maya deals with 5 veilings, literally kanchukas in Sanskrit, 5 veilings. Each of these 5 veilings veil the absolute qualities that we just mentioned, all of them, by utilizing the very power inherent in those 5 pure categories. So these 5 pure categories undergo transformation and become limited. So that what is beyond time gives rise to time. That what is beyond space gives rise to space, you see? And so forth. That what is beyond any longing gives rise to longing, gives rise to what everyone experiences as a source of separate self, limitation. So this projection is and part and parcel, without which there is no creation. Why am I speaking about this? So that understanding the mechanics of creation equips us with the understanding of what behind diversity. Because otherwise we constantly will look at the, let's say, where is the error in the system? What went wrong? How, if we all blame it on the psychology, as, let's say, in a lot of spiritual conversations these days, we will miss the bigger picture. We always will end up with this blaming our own belly button for wanting to be a belly button. You see, a belly button is a byproduct of being born of the mom, right? So belly button there is legitimate. It's no longer serving any purpose, except we can tease each other, like circumambulating your own belly with one's own problems, right? Understanding this is important because so that we know what went into creation itself, what went into the process of manifestation. So therefore, we can actually speak of this, right, us even having this conversation, or there is this world, is the result of that fragmentation and a byproduct. So in other words, you cannot separate that. Diversity cannot be, it's like having one's cake and eat it to us, the English say. So it's like there is no way for this multiplicity unless unless unity is sacrificed. So this is a leitmotif of Indian culture. per se, Indian civilization. Unity sacrifice for diversity to take place. How can that unity be reclaimed? The same exact way. There's no way out of that. That's what the Kundalini book is about, because it speaks about it from the deeply esoteric perspective of what went into this manifestation, the process of cascading, right, tattvas, cascading categories that gives us this unique experience of being here now, in the body, with the senses, in space, in time, confined, and yet paradoxically always free. Confined within this physiology, and yet never confined as consciousness. So this is where understanding is born of this. Let's say this, one can learn, one can hear, one partake in discourses, one can arrive to that. One can get this revealed in meditation, whatever, right? Because this is, we cannot limit consciousness. There is a myriad of ways of how can that display itself, how these insights can rise. So if we are to speak about this, how can make this down-to-earth, day-to-day understanding activity, there is no way to have this as a let's say, a cut-out follow-up of what to do, because we are already embodiment of this very awareness. And it is, in a way, it's rather the understanding that this, what is this experience at any time, is a result and the price simultaneously. You see, so it's like, often to give this childlike example in some of the discourses, I give example of the first crash course in photography. It's the way our eye is structured. Our eye, due to its structure, cannot see the mountains and the flowers here in the garden simultaneously. One will be blown out of view. If you focus on the flowers, then the landscape goes into background. If your attention focuses on the background, then the flowers are out of focus. And there's no way out of that. A human eye cannot hold this simultaneously. The photography in the olden days, that's how you gives that, working with the aperture of the diaphragm. In a not unlike manner, this is how awareness is experienced. When experience takes place, our awareness always recedes on the background. For the awareness to be experienced, or for the experiencer to be in a driving seat, experience needs to cease. What needs to cease is all that what is otherwise goes into the full gamut. And that already is spiritual methodology. This is why people devise different meditative practices to hone, to culture that. So that what we speak of here is all boils down to necessity to grow up. We speak of the innocence of the child, right? Of the toddler, of the baby, of awareness of the child, which we can only either memorize, some of us have access to that, or observe without knowing what it feels like. But we know very well that the child cannot remain in that state. It would have to be sacrificed. That very same, that what is precious in a child, right, will be sacrificed, and that's part and parcel of growing up to come into the maturity. So this is also inevitable. So therefore, this in itself can be spoken of as mimicking that what is happening from behind the scenes. The very ages of man, the very ages, the very phases of that human being also mimics this in a way. And that's how cultures view this. This is why there is a phase for this, phase for that, right? There's a phase when it's the most uniquely, extraordinarily, most tangibly experienced age of uncertainty, the teenage. Yes, when we kiss goodbye to childhood, And suddenly we are now being subjected to this, right? All these juices of endocrine system now making us move in ways we've never experienced before. It's a totally new ball game. It's so uncertain for boys, for girls alike. No one is exception going through this. Teenage years, we forget that. But I'm having teenage children now, so I know it's all very fresh. It's all very now. Everything can throw them off their course. Everything is experienced for the first time. And then comes another phase, right? The phase when that also would have to be overgrown. With the age of uncertainty comes the age of, oh, what do I do now? I'm a grown-up person, right? I'm growing into so that in itself here is the price we pay, or we can shift that, consciousness pays. So that it has to be reclaimed, therefore. If it did not have to be reclaimed, and there are, of course, we shouldn't really measure everyone and everything with the same kind of non-existent etalon. There are very rare exceptional beings out there who are beyond this. That memory never leaves them. They born in that and they live in that. They come here to fulfill particular duty, but it's no point to talk about it because it's not applicable. There are far few between. For us, simple folk, we have to do a lot of work, and that work never ends. There are different frontiers, different territories that is being covered, even in the process of return, in the process of greater embodiment and greater integration. So going back to where you have started building this latest, let's say, series of questions and inquiries, and how and what, and this again all boils down to how do we reclaim consciousness? What is here? How can one reclaim that what is somehow is forgone or fallen so much on a foreground, on a background, that it no longer feels present? What feels present is the sense of lack, insecurity, inferiority, fear, and all that host of other things, right, that immediately comes. And again, reading the book may open eyes, may give us, but it's tangible, it's visceral, it's biological. Endocrine system working in that way. It's in gut and brain responses, synaptic connections. We're speaking about here now from the perspective, which is one cannot leapfrog oneself from one's, let's say, you call it a shadow. We can speak about it in these terms, or let's say in a more let's say neuroscience savvy manner, we could speak about it, how wired we are. Yeah. How wired we are, all these synaptic connections that were made during the time of coming into the full measure of being who we are, which is inseparable part of that maturity. Some people never come to that maturity. It doesn't matter the age. You come across life and, you meet people that are 42, 45, 50, and they kind of display adolescent qualities. And I only wonder, how can you live your life like that? It's almost like unbelievable how it is even possible, but it is possible. It is very possible because of the way that nothing qualitatively shifted, changed, metamorphed. So going back to this, what synaptic connections here gave us, first of all, a healthy sense of self. Mm-hmm. So if I to now summarize and bring this all together into a more coherent picture, so just as the consciousness from the grand perspective undergoes this fragmentation in order for the multiplicity to take place, this can also be seen from a localized perspective where the coming of age is inseparable from creating these healthy boundaries of one's sense of self, when one knows, at least, even if it is still and cannot be, of course, spoken of as true wisdom, let alone enlightenment or self-realization, but at least it's psychologically healthier being. This is inseparable from this, what goes into creation of these boundaries. And these boundaries are made out of myriad of synaptic connections that give one healthy sense of self. You see? And this is before any spiritual work even progresses. This is just giving us the healthy sense of an individual. So this individual is not crooked, is not limping, is not humped or, you see, depleted, defective, deflecting, and constantly living in that very, very contorted, distorted reality, because this somehow boundaries have not been created. These boundaries I'm talking about now as healthy boundaries of healthy ego. See? Yeah. And we're not even touching the topic of how detrimental it is for this type of people to be exposed to teachings which bashes the ego and ask someone to be egoless, because these people didn't even come into savoring fully that, let's say, paradoxically now, that fruit of what this means to be individual being, because unless the fruit is ripe, it cannot fall off the tree. It will be like trying to forcefully dislodge it, right? To offer it to God. But then the God will try it. It's sour. Sorry, you pluck it off the tree, but I don't want it. I'm paraphrasing Rumi's poetry, right? I'm paraphrasing Rumi, like when he says, either in the story of the cook and the chickpea, back into the pot. You're not soft enough, right? Or back into the garden, under the rain, under the sunshine, run around in the garden. You see, this we're touching upon, because I feel we'll do injustice if we don't touch this, even if by these passing notes, that the coming into one's healthy parameters of what it means to be individual is a prerequisite for foregoing that individuality in exchange or in the metamorphosis of greater understanding, greater transmutation, ultimately metamorphosis. That metamorphosis that give us direct, visceral sense of who we are, which frees us from pangs of insecurity, fear of death, limitations of all kinds, because that is a full-body affair. It's not just a mental grokking, it's a cellular way of knowing the reality at the level where it cannot be forgotten, and therefore no reminder is required. So there's no way to make our society different unless consciousness-based methodologies become part of educational system. So in other words, that's the answer also to where you have ended the inquiry with, how can we, like, yes, system of education, all this is like, what's the point to learn this and that if the most important thing is not learned? Yeah. And that pain is known to me as a parent. It's not easy, because it's also a collective level of consciousness that everyone is swimming in that same, whatever that, that's in that same soup. Everyone is in that, submerged in that. All that information that is out there. You can't control children, your own children. If someone they erroneously think that, he must have enlightened kids by now. No, it's an everyday battle. You see, everyday patience, and like sometimes this way, that way, and everyone will ultimately have to make their own moves, mistakes, errors to learn. We can't prevent that. But at the, let's say, more of that universal way of speaking about it, as you know, yes, our education system is good for nothing because it's all information based rather than consciousness based, from where it can grow and expand. And I know that personally. I know this exactly how and what changes this brings when there is access to transcendence, right, on a daily basis. You know, our life lived from a different place. Our nervous system has this great elasticity. So, you know, jolting experience doesn't break us. It may bend us, it may jolt us. It will, right? There's no way out of that. But by virtue of its elasticity, it will bounce back. It will absorb that shock. It will vibrate with it. But if it's calcified, it's at the expense of everything crashing. You see the difference between something being in the quality of that, you know, plasma versus crystallized into a glass or ice or water. Can, you know, H2O can be as ice and can be as water, as a flowing river.
Well, the fascia in our body is that, right? It's that crystalline structure that is exactly what you're speaking to. It's
absolutely
releasing the weight of the traumas that we carry globally and individually, so that we can become that supple, like elements, right? All the elements are within our body and our nervous system, but a lot of us, me included, are in that process of shifting the nervous system out of survival state, where I've lived for my entire life because of the environment that I was born into. It has taken a lifetime of repatterning the subconscious mind and unwinding the nervous system to find safety within.
And that is constantly being instructed by the collective consciousness, which still lives these outlived paradigms. So it's like, literally, it's like you need to rise. One need to rise above that thick cloud, right, of that miasma of collective consciousness, where all these fears are not just byproduct, but utilized by these very, very negative tendencies in consciousness that are somehow gotten hold of, and therefore actively influencing from behind the scenes. Sort of, you know, a lot has been said about this, of how the fear of separation, of that, you know, supports that sense of separate self. This is no longer conspiratorial talks, that the governing structures, the governing institutions are the most fearful of free individuals. So when there are enough free individuals in a society, there is a shift, there's a collective shift taking place. And that collective shift can remodel society mercilessly to the way that no one can have control over. So this is also, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but that's with regard to this prevalent fears. They're not my fears. There are fears per se that are being capitalized on.
Yeah.
As currency.
Yeah, whether we like it or not, we are all, it's all one. So we are plugged into the same collective field. And of course, we experience it based on our own individual level of consciousness, like the degree of intensity. But we are all affected by it because we are all one. It's all happening now, right? There is no time, there is no space. It's all the quantum infinite now that we're all part of and experience on some level, and to the level of awareness that we have of it. Oh man, so how do we then, this is where I'm at now, which, you know, as I shared with you before we start recording, is claiming that mission of actually physically creating this. Maybe it starts off as a mastermind. And when I say mastermind, it's like a group of brilliant minds like yourself right? That experience life from a different vantage point and have really valuable pieces of the puzzle of how do we actually restructure a more evolved civilization, like at the systems level, individually first, right? Do you agree that it has to start within each individual, like that process of individuation takes place within the Atman?
Yeah.
And
Yes,
then
of course. Of
then
course.
how do we structure the collective? So maybe it starts off because it is, of course, a lifetime project, right? Of creating this physical place on earth that the way I feel into it, because everything exists now in the quantum, I experience it as when I tap into that potential, it's a very powerful portal that exists on earth somewhere. I feel really drawn to Portugal for some reason. I lived there for 4 years and I felt like there's some kind of a grid there. I don't know. But that space, physical space, and a collective of humans that gather with a shared around the same values with the same vision and mission, there's so much power that gets amplified when those energies come together with that shared intention. So, like I mentioned earlier, right, I just in the last week or two have claimed that, okay, I'm going all in on creating this. I have no idea how, right? This is so much bigger than maybe even this lifetime. But if I don't choose it consciously, if I don't claim that, then who will? If I feel that that's my mission, then I must start acting and taking the steps, physical steps, to at least move in that direction. Whether it happens in this lifetime or when it happens, it's irrelevant. It's just moving towards what I feel the most passionate and alive in my soul as a seed, as a potential that I am to co-create, collaborate with other souls that also want to use their life force energy to co-create a different version of life, a different version, like a prototype of this is how we do life from a more evolved systems level perspective. And again, it has to start with introducing consciousness at the earliest possible time, of course developmentally appropriate. And this is why I'm wanting to create this mastermind of people that are experts, right, in child development and psychology and neuroscience, all these different things, so that it can become the environment itself and incorporating being immersed in nature, because nature already has everything embedded into it. It's because we are severed from nature. We live in these bubble worlds that are like completely cut off from what we are. We are not separate from it. We are nature. But most of us don't experience ourselves. We see a tree, there's this, there's that. It's not, there's no like that sense of oneness that I am the tree, I am the soil, I'm all of it, I am the sky. And so it's because that we're not living from that lived awareness, that lived direct experience. And I feel that if humans were brought back to nature, where we were like hands and feet in the soil, that remembrance would naturally occur, because I believe the earth is already at that frequency of oneness. She always has been. And just being rooted physically in nature, I believe, would already start to reorganize our nervous system and create coherence just from the physical, not even talking about any practices, consciousness, all that. Just being connected to earth, I think, already begins to activate some kind of a memory of your soul. And especially if you already come with the intention to, like, this is what I would like to do in this lifetime, to become fully sovereign and creative, right? A creative force, regenerative force. And my deepest like excitement and joy is like bringing all of us together and seeing what can be possible when those energies are synced up what can be possible, the acceleration of creation as a result of like syncing up with that intention. So this is what I'm here to do. I just don't know how yet, but it's one foot in front of the other, and then seeing how life supports that intention. Because I feel that the reason I even have this desire is because life wants that for itself, you know. So yeah, there's no answers here. It's more an invitation for anyone listening that wants to be part of co-creating this new world together. I haven't, like I said, I haven't created the infrastructure or anything of what that looks like physically, but maybe the next steps would be, yeah, anyone who wants to co-create that, getting together, I don't know, once or twice a month and just masterminding these ideas and seeing what can be co-created, because I really believe it's time. Like there's collective is ripe and ready for it. And personally, what I'm missing is just funding, like purchasing a piece of land, building the infrastructure for the school, and then bringing people like yourself and many others, experts in their respective fields, to actually like physically bring this to life. We unfortunately are playing in the game of life where money and resources are part of that. And so, yeah, if someone's listening and they have a couple $1 million that they would like to invest into it, it's on the table, because it's really is time. Like it's just really time for a new way of being. And there's no reason we can't create it. We're all creator beings. We just need to channel our energy in the direction of what we actually want to live and experience. There's no reason why that can't actually become real.
Yes, yeah,
This is my invitation.
yeah, beautiful vision and beautiful invitation, and it in itself is the very language of consciousness. Language in itself can be here, or this can be also understood from the perspective of why these ideas are now becoming a shared reality of many people, and in various different parts of the world, independently from each other, or let's say inspired by hearing here the something, and then it becomes inevitable that one wants to leave from that place. And one knows that that's the only let's say a dream worth pursuing, and that in itself, of course, is very much in the reality of how consciousness speaks something into creation. Just as I like that very line, I often bring this, attributed to Friedrich Nietzsche: ideas that rule the world come with dove steps, right? So that they're very tender, right? Very gentle, very sort of imperceptible. And I want to reflect something else into what you've shared as that beautiful vision is the work of a brilliant quantum physicist, David Bohm, who is not that much known today in the scientific world. He's very well known. And he's known for ambivalent reasons, because some people felt, many of his peers at the time felt, that he forsaken brilliant career that was ahead of him for spiritual mumbo jumbo, as they thought that what the man allowed himself into. But at some point, he was dissatisfied with face value of that what quantum physics were communicating. And though he came in that generation immediately after, let's say, beings of likes of Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein, right? All these, let's say, founding fathers of the quantum physics, he was dissatisfied that this discipline does not address human qualities such as love, compassion. So in other words, this do not configure neither into the language nor in the curriculum. And he was deeply moved by that. So at some point he met this Jiddu Krishnamurti teacher who was very active at around that time. And he literally forsaken his academic career, and he starts following Jiddu Krishnamurti, and eventually goes all the way to India and spends prolonged periods of time in his conversations with Jiddu Krishnamurti, some of which were published. But he comes up with this still paradoxically not that very well known work known as Implicate Order, where he utilized all his understanding and spiritual breakthroughs into showing how consciousness itself functions. So the implicate order suggests that things don't work how we consider them work, but rather he gives example of, let's say, different nucleus of newly budding consciousness, first independent from each other, appear scattered around. But what begins to happen is the amalgamation of this nucleus. So he gives this, of course, the extraordinary, subtle, beautiful picture of how the amalgamation of this gives birth of the new culture within. So in other words, not somebody constructs this culture, not like somebody comes, we're going to build new culture. We're going to create a new culture which will have this, and these qualities, as opposed to culture we don't anymore agree with. But he argued that it happens at the level, first imperceptible level of this seemingly independent, but subtly interdependent nucleus as droplets of water on a large, imagine, leaf, where the gravity brings this and it becomes a stream. So what was first individual droplets of water as this nucleus of alternative culture begins to merge together and create a stream where that is the birthing. That's the work. You can look it up. Just, the implicate order, David Bohm, Bohm. And to me, this I've often, particularly in the early years of me going out publicly with this work, like I used to bring this, and I haven't done it for a while. So I thought it will really be very fitting to your vision, that this vision is shared by many, many, many people out there. Exactly. Yeah. So and of course the aspect, right, that slight like lament that we still subjected to the economics of it all, and no doubt we are, because the currently prevalent system doesn't have an alternative, and it will take time and perhaps a prolonged period of time before it can remodulate itself, and we don't know exactly what form it will take. But there will be, I personally absolutely convinced, a point of break or shift where people with the resources literally will begin to make it into their business once that dream, which was outlived itself back when it was created, of the outer expansion, particularly culminating in extraterrestrial exploration of cosmos, lunar, Mars programs, all this, let's say, kind of ideas that we will even inhabit other worlds, other planets. All this is the world of ideas that have been created somewhere in the break of the 19th to the 20th century, actually at around the time of the biggest breakthroughs in quantum mechanics and quantum physics, which coincided with also the where humanity took flight in the first flying machines, first airplanes, and the first rockets. You see, so the whole industry was born, which of course was hijacked by military complexes, with all the innovations inevitably happens. But all this outlived reality sooner or later will deflect. So people like Elon Musk could be seen as the last sort of like dinosaurs of that world that with all the resources that they possess, they're putting them in what they believe to be progressive. And the new generation of where the wealth is accumulated will come when they will realize that the best investment, the true investment, is actually investing back into the planet Earth, as what you have spoken about in terms of that what is the soil, that what grows on the planet, because this is like that. We're destroying the planet, biodiversity, with monocultures because of the corporate system of food chain industry, right? Where the food, exactly, where the health system is completely the lack of thereof, more likely, that the health of the individual is proportionately related to that very biodiversity. So that biodiversity compromised in the soil reflects in the biodiversity of the biome in the body. And so we are depleted at the fundamental level where the soil no longer produces the required, let's say, complexity and fullness of its mineral order that nourishes us from within. So this is where the new billionaires would have to come. And of course, consciousness-based education is another frontier that was touched upon by some of the, let's say, pioneers and that moved, the movers and shakers of the counterculture of the 60s and the 70s, when meditation walked into every household practically, right? Where it became household item, right? Where there was a true euphoria that we are on the brink of a very new world. Unfortunately, it was then somehow a different reality, different dreams, and different aspirations took over. But I firmly believe that this next return or next turn, the evolutionary unfoldment, will be precisely return to that what in our mission in our own song publishing house, which we started only 2.5 years ago, called Song Publishing. We have a short mission there where we speak of the new return to geocentrism, not as geocentrism of Ptolemaios versus Copernicus, not in that sense, but geocentrism in terms of ecology, spirituality, and psychology. So yes. Because we only have this earth, we don't have another. It doesn't matter how many billions of potential like planets that are inhabitable. It's a bankrupt dream that human beings can ever be transported onto another planet.
And
it's
why?
never going to happen because it's yes, exactly. Yeah.
Why? Why go anywhere where you have literally everything already present for flourishing?
Yes, exactly. But you see, these dreams, this kind of like childish, adolescent ideas that some grown-up men still entertain. It's pathetic. It's pathetic, but also scary because it shows the limitation of the human. In this case, understanding of what's really the priority right now. See, people look at the AI as a savior, as a messiah. It's pathetic. And likewise, all these space programs, this is where the major work will be. This is the next frontier. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy because when the world collide, there is this also antagonizing energies that rise to, you see, like just like in the human being, awakening is accompanied by very, very prolonged, often phases of that what needs to be metamorphed. And the old world is hard to die. The old beliefs, outlived, outlived realities and outlived belief system is also not like it's, lucky are those who witness the collapse of it in one go, but usually it's a much more extended, I would say, process. And sometimes it's back and forth, were thrown back only to regain that territory again, because this is not it's not a switch, it's not click of a finger. So your aspirations and your intentions to step into that can also be seen as, that at some point we are asked simply or have the capacity, a courage to ask ourselves, what do I want to do with this life? What do I want to stand for? And then, then the answers can surprise us to the degree of, well, that's the only thing I want to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think everyone has that invitation in front of them available. It's just about asking not necessarily the right questions, but the questions that can realign you back, like reorient you back to your true self, right? The soul. Because my belief is that every soul, well, those on the path of realizing all that they are, the soul knows. And everything that you just spoke about, the AI revolution and all these people that are trying to get off the planet, my speculation is that they are actually disconnected from their soul. Because I don't know if the soul would really be wanting to do that. Something else is driving that desire. I don't know if the soul would have that. Maybe, I don't know. It's up for, up for grabs. But yeah, I think everyone has that invitation available to them to ask, what world do I want to co-create? And then channel our energy towards that. Because again, with technology advancing, truly, like, everything is available and possible. It's just, can you believe, in my experience, like at the subconscious level, am I capable of that? Because as in my like real time experience right now, right, the old version of me, the old identity, has to evolve and upgrade to someone who actually has the capacity to stand for this and move with conviction and move from that energy of certainty and inevitability. That is a big ask. It's like an initiation for the infantile self to grow up into the version of self who knows itself as limitless and powerful, as a being with infinite possibilities open and available to them, should they have the courage to claim it first, claim that identity first, because reality only follows your identity. If you at the subconscious level don't believe that you're capable, you won't be able to attract the opportunities or the conversations or whatever it is to make that happen. So the invitation for anyone listening that also feels that call of their soul mission is to pause and start looking within and really investigating these beliefs. Do I actually believe that I am someone capable of stepping into that identity? It's a process, it's a process, because at the psychological level, there are shifts that happen again at the identity level of I am. What do I believe? Who do I believe myself to be? And reconstructing all of that. And then at the nervous system level, being able to hold that much energy, because again, this vision requires someone who can manage a lot, right? And the past version of me could never hold that. Her nervous system was not capable of that. So it's that work of, if you're calling in that much resources and stewardship of this energy, then start reorganizing your system in a way that actually, and this is, I've started looking into Kabbalah, right? In Kabbalah, they talk about growing your vessel to actually receive the light of the Creator, that the Creator always is flowing energy to us and wants to give it to us. But again, can our vessel hold that? And again, it's not even to hold it, to hoard it, but can it be moved through the vessel for the highest good of all and kind of be not recycled, but there's a process of inhale, exhale, but can your body at the nervous system level hold that much energy to be able to like be a conduit for it to move through you and to remain stable and equanimous and not attach any story to it, right? But just be the channel for it. So that's my work. That's where I'm, reconstructing my system to be able to, at the identity level and the nervous system level, to be able to magnetize the types of people you're speaking about, the new generation of wealth capital holders that will, I'm hoping that will start awakening to their soul missions as the ones to be able to actually, share that wealth for the greatest impact for the future generations. And that can only happen at the systems level. If the systems are what they are, I don't know if we can create sustainable change. But the systems can only change if we first create a prototype, like a living lab. Like here's how it can be done. And then it's documented, and then you have this document essentially that you share and then you replicate and you teach. And eventually, right, this is a long-term vision over hundreds of years. It spreads like a network all over the globe. But it's got to start in, somewhere. Someone's got to hold that vision. And I'm talking about one person, right? A collective of beings need to hold that potential as a possibility, not a pipe dream, not a utopian dream. It is very possible. We just need the right minds and the right resources to come together with that shared desire and do the individual work, right? Again, it's at the individual level and then gets reflected collectively. And that's why the work you're doing is so important, because I believe that's what you're inviting people into, right? An immersive experience, a direct experience of touching that. And you can speak, of course, to that. I don't know what exactly the kind of processes you take people through, but it's beyond the mind. It needs to be felt in the body. It needs to be experienced, to be direct, to actually create a shift that's beyond the mind.
Yes, that this, as they say, your words to God's ears, right? As they say. If there is anything to reflect on in our own work, of course, the emphasis has been an ongoing message, along with, let's say, what most people come into this work is to redress what each individual is going through. So that this you see simultaneously there is this tremendous need for finding balance again through healing, self-healing, right, through recovery, including those who had, let's say, encountered directly experience through expanded states of awareness. But just as you spoke about it, their nervous systems crumbled instead of being empowered, because that force, that power, it requires a vehicle, just like you can't drink wine from the old containers, as Jesus said in one of the, right, the saying. So that in itself is inseparable from the metamorphosis. So a lot of this work is around this, you see, around that. So it's a balancing act. If it was only about to show people and to open up, and then all just unfolds in a spectacularly miraculous way, that would have been a piece of cake. But there is so much that individual beings today encounter in their own system, because there is we live in time of the tremendous accumulation of many collective stresses from the ancestral level, right, that passed on at the DNA level, right, that generational, literally generational traumas, not just what this or so and so experience, but it's a build up which manifests itself as these unseen obstacles to experience joy, to experience love, relationships. So there's that level of work which is therapeutic, which is required uh, appropriate ways, container, everything, right? And of course, at all times, there's a reminder that whatever we do is the ultimately this work is about coming into the what is. There is no other option. Is that what we all here are to do? That's precious, precious fact of being, precious fact of being in the body, the preciousness of that human incarnation, because it's a fact. And the reality of the situation is, of course, is that it's not in the grandiosity of, let's say, one's ideas. It can be lived in a very seemingly quiet way, but it's the quality of experience. And the quality of our experience, literally, the cognition, perception, all depends on how opened the doorways of perceptions are themselves. So all this kind of comes into that uh, circle of interdependency. So how everything is codependent, that ecosystem. So therefore, there is no way to open up the great vistas and for the experience unless there is the possibility for qualitative shifts in perception itself. And that what the work is known for, you see. Only those who come into this work then learn about the aspects of the importance of the collective consciousness, or rather the influence that groups of meditators can have on the collective consciousness. And this is the legacy of my own teacher, of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who have spoken about it back in the years, back in the days that immediately following up with the counterculture years of the 60s, where these methodologies were brought out into the open, tried and tested. And somehow it's slow on the take, even though there's so many researches were made, you see. After the period of excitement, it just goes into like, again, something else, the priority takes over. But you see, what we're witnessing also, of course, is that die hard of the old world, of the reality that outlived itself. Whether we speak about it in terms of the geopolitics or whatever name we can give it, but each time there is a big war, a massive conflict on a human scale, along with the ongoing conflicts, it literally acts as that counterwave, you see, counterwave to the rising of collective consciousness. So this is what is at stake right now. It's making or breaking. It's like literally, it's measured by the heartbeat of each individual. It's like where the tipping point will be, what energies will prevail, where it will be, will the balance be achieved? Will the goodness take its sway over these tendencies that otherwise go on the rampage now globally? So this is what we're living. This is why even the potential for these people to come and, let's say, that capital, and to give that to the causes, right? That in itself has to be accompanied by, first and foremost, conscious changes in the beings themselves. Because if they do not experience it firsthand, there's no agitation, there's no persuasion, there's no conversion would work. And you see, there will be a tendency still to cling to the old, tried and tested, outlived. So one way or another, this is where the affairs are settled anyway. It's settled at that level, fundamentally at that level. So the new reality here is at the tipping point constantly of each and every one of our own consciousness here. And that reminder has been brought in many cultures we can find that as a red thread. So so it's not just so easy. It may look, as I said, something can sound inspiring, but all too often it all ends up being somehow subjected to these very tendencies, you see? We can even argue that there are examples in the epics themselves where spiritual knowledge, where highest level of understanding was obscured by spiritual knowledge, by those who have had demonic nature, like in the epic of Ramayana. You know, the demon Ravana, for whose sake Rama was born as an incarnation of Vishnu, to slay him, that was his job, was not just an average demon. He was very educated. He sat for many, many years in meditation and obtained the boons and favors from the highest gods, from Shiva himself as well. So you see, so he was, like we could say, a scholar on par to no one. He was like in a league of his own. And yet his essence was wretched. So he turned all that he allowed all that to be go into complete waste in a sense. It was not for benefit of others. And that's also, this is a reminder. You see how these powerful energies can also be usurped, and I've witnessed that. I've witnessed many times how awakenings can even go astray because this can have that very, I would say, quarantine-like phase, treacherous phase of how this can play tricks before one passes through this literally as the purgatory and leaves it behind. How this has been hijacked, you see? And many, many awakenings are being hijacked, period. I mean, if you look around of what people are doing and what these people out there, like all coming to light in our most recent, let's say, occurrences, what we hear, what we read, what was discussed, some of these people who did despicable things have always been interested in the latest innovations in the field of consciousness. They've been always interested to know what is the latest research in the field of neuroscience. We're all finding all this out, you see? So how can that be then? How can we how can that be, what's the right word to put it, reconcile this? How can that be reconciled? See? Isn't the knowledge and all that supposed to make us free and make us better human beings? So this is why that time we live in now is particularly important, particularly, I would say, fragile, unique, in a sense that it's not all straightforward. It's literally requires a lot of that sense of discrimination not to be subjected to these energies that are very strongly playing out in the collective. So to rise, one need to rise and meet all this within one's own being to begin with, right? To meet it boldly, courageously, without any reservations, without any kind of like giving oneself a slack and somehow kind of, no, it's a merciless process, whilst at the same time also knowing that one would be constantly tempted, constantly thwarted, constantly being again and again and again. And then the collective will be making it also always that, you see, that what I call miasma of that, you see, so one had to constantly hover above, rise above, whilst also being fully planted, fully grounded at the very same time. So this is quite a graceful walk, I would say, quite a lot being asked of us.
Yeah, I think that what you're speaking to, the way I'm understanding, is like the game of the dream, right? The Maya playing itself out. And it requires a lot of discernment on the individual part to be able to see through that illusion and to continuously choose the purest form of it.
Yes. Yes, exactly. That's the discrimination. All embraciveness and discrimination is required. So many people, so many teachings today serve the nihilistic ideas. So many teachings that are popularized, particularly those that the world is an illusion, only inadvertently support and participate, even if indirectly, in that what actually is here to be faced boldly, fully, consciously. But if I'm withdrawing myself from this, as all this is just an illusion, if there's some people suffering there en masse, if there is a genocide, if there is, let's say, constant conflicts, if there is abuses and, towards children, towards weaker, towards, that and then somehow it's all just a dream of consciousness. That's a cop-out. And that cop-out by those who are purportedly, supposedly be the movers and shakers of consciousness is not good. It's a different story when someone lives that unity, viscerally, literally, honestly, sincerely, truly lives that state where all these polarities are constantly at the level of utter and entire balance. They are all these respective realities are finding their homes. And it's not at the expense of someone's being, let's say, disturbed by it. But so many people just like prefer to have the head in sand kind of approach because, well, this, like I just want to, in my own little enlightenment or my own big enlightenment and everything else. So some teachings become inadvertently retrogressive teachings. They don't serve the necessity of time. And in times like this, it's very important. After all, the Bhagavad Gita itself is a prime example, even though it's a non-dual scripture. It speaks about the conflict on the Kurukshetra. And the very opening passages of the very, very battle itself, where the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita unfolds, is where the blind king asks his advisor, right? The blind king Dhritarashtra asked, tell me, Sanjaya, who are these people eager to fight, gathered here together? So this is like the blind king. He is a metaphor of the mind that is obscured to its own light of consciousness and cannot see. Yeah. And it asks to be illumined. Who have these beings gathered here on the battlefield? So in that timely hour before the teaching will unfold, there is necessity to see who is fighting whom, what's the cause, what's the leitmotif here. So the clan of Kauravas and clan of Pandavas are cousins standing in opposing now armies in a deadly combat. And that's the leitmotif of the non-dual scripture. Let us not make mistake about it. And yet it is clearly defined here, and as the teaching will unfold, it will have some uncompromising, illumining constantly ways of how this and that yoga is revealed here in its full measure. So our time is particularly important, precious, and urgent is because of that. It's because of that exactly. So it requires this full summation, full presence of all our capacities to hold it at the needle point of it all. And at the same time also know where to stand, where to give our attention, where to see through it all. It's not I don't know another time in history where it was more potent than now. And I'm not trying to make it feel sort of like, following up the doom and gloom pictures. No, on the contrary, I always, and any of these discourses and any of, let's say, whenever touches that, ultimately light always prevails. That's also in the nature of consciousness. So the very aspect of when the laws of nature are in decline, when aspects of nature are in decline, the very principle of incarnation of the higher deities exemplifies here the very, very self-administering aspects of consciousness rise within in response to the necessity of time. And that's what we live right now. Yes. It's that wave of consciousness that rises within, which is here to awash the world anew because of how far we come to the place of no return. There's no way to continue like that. It needs to have that renewal.
Yeah. It's ultimately, if this is the path we continue on, it's a self-destructive path. That's where it ends up. So we course correct.
Yes, course correct, exactly. Yes. It's rising within consciousness. For rising within us at the individual level. And yes, and then collective level is woven out of the sum total of this.
This is something that can be a never-ending conversation because there's so many threads that can be followed that are incredibly valuable. But just to be respectful of your time and our viewers' time, I think it was a beautiful conversation with a lot of food for thought that I hope whoever is listening can, it can be a seed or it can be an activation or whatever their soul was ready to receive. I hope those who felt called to it will receive whatever it is that they are ready to receive. Thank you for your time, for your presence, for your knowledge, your wisdom. The work you're doing is so important to just press that pause and go within and, I don't know exactly the words that you use, but to take the power back from whatever is controlling your life, to know that you are the one that ultimately has the free will and the wisdom and the answers already planted within, to be the purest expression that you are already, right? As we started the conversation, that the ultimate is we already are everything. We just by design we forget to then go through that journey of remembering and standing fully in our physical vessel as the one, each of us being like a full, complete whole, the one that then gets reflected through the diversity and the multiplicity, the seeming multiplicity. But how beautiful, right? This dance of oneness as many.
Yes, standing in our sovereignty as being of who we are. Yes. Thank you, Leyla, for initiating this. It was a great joy, and great privilege to share and to reflect and converse.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.